So hi everyone, welcome to the Seed Fund panel at Digital RESI September 2020. This panel will be moderated by Gary Gershoni from Life Science Angel. Gary, you can take it away from here.
Thank you very much, Joey. It's a pleasure to moderate this panel. We have, I think, a very broad base of panelists that come from different areas of early stage seed investing. My name is Gary Gershoni. And I'd like to actually start off with introducing our panel members, and each one of them will give a brief bio about their background. June, would you like to begin, please?
I'm happy to. Such a pleasure to be here. So I am an investment partner at both Julian's Partners and Social Starts, where we focus on investing in emerging science and technologies for individual health and through health to delivery of happiness. At a fund, I'm primarily focusing on looking at digital health, medical device, neurotech, mental health, and other biotech platforms. I've been with this team for the past several years. Originally, I was trained as a biologist, so spent several years completing my PhD in biology. So after that, I've been spending the past 6-7 years in the Valley here for technology and life science investment. So great pleasure to be here. Thanks, Gary.
Terrific. And Prathna, why don't you give us a bit of background and where you're located as well?
Sure. Hi, Gary, and hi, everyone. Thanks for logging in, and I'm really happy to be here speaking this afternoon. My name is Prathna. As Gary mentioned, I'm based in Toronto. I serve as managing director of an angel investor network called Maple Leaf Angels. We are Toronto's most active and most diverse group, and we're investing in Canadian startups, in fintech, in health tech, in B2B software, and in hardware devices. I also serve the general partner function for the MLA 48 funds. So our funds are making investment decisions in 48 hours, which is pretty attractive for early stage startups. So there's certainly a lot of proposals that we're filtering through on a day-to-day basis. Other than that, I spend a lot of time sort of doing things like this, you know, sharing knowledge, bringing together our investors with entrepreneurs in the community, connecting folks, and enabling entrepreneurship in the ecosystem around us.
Great, terrific background. Anya, please give us your background.
Sure. Thanks so much for inviting me to the panel. I'm Anya, and I'm the head of Lumen Accelerator in UK. I'm London-based, and in terms of Lumen Accelerator, what we do is make very early stage investments and provide resources in terms of capital, but also sequencing, and we're focused on genomics only. So I invest in life science companies with a focus on genomics. In terms of my background, I was previously an entrepreneur myself. So I founded a digital women's health business in the UK, which was a Cambridge University spin-out where I was a researcher. Prior to that, I was also, for all my sins, I was in Goldman Sachs and banking for a while. So I've experienced both the investment and the entrepreneur life, as I call it.
Great, that's a really impressive background. Nancy, why don't you give us your background as well? Nancy, I think you're on mute. Yeah, on the bottom of the screen, you can just, there you go, perfect.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. My name is Nancy Torres-Kaufman. I'm the founder of the Beacon Capital Family Office. Our focus is mainly in therapeutics. We were founded in 2009, and we began investing mainly in phase 1 and phase 2 assets, and have then moved our scope of financing offering into the seed round, into the seed space. It's very important for our group to have the ability to look at companies that are up and coming in this space, and to be able to begin to gauge what the potential investments of the future are going to be. So as a result, in 2019, we founded the Beacon Pharmaceutical Jupiter, which is an accelerator, which is smart lead building that's under construction now, which is designed to bring biologics manufacturing from one of the top 3 CDMOs in the world, along with a suite of services and seed funding for up to 70 biotechnology companies that are going to be joining us in the Jupiter area. And those companies are going to be supported by our investment arm, Beacon Capital, and we will make further investments in these companies. So our goal as a seed investor and our background as a seed investor is to be able to guide and nurture these companies. Our focus in oncology, neurodegenerative diseases. There's going to be some research around immunology and also a focus around aging and some rare diseases. But the idea is to be able to have the manufacturing and also to be able to help companies that are focused in that where the basis of their products are in mammalian cell, viral vector, plasmids, and cell and gene therapy to be able to build their assets and their IP and their cell lines in one facility and be able to commercialize and scale up for commercialization within one space. So that's the main venture that we're focused on right now, and is mainly targeted towards looking at seed assets. And while we are located in Jupiter, Florida, and have a footprint in New York, we are international in nature. We are looking at collaborations in Israel and have a footprint in Israel, also have a footprint in London. And that's basically it. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
That's wonderful, Nancy. Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I would like to say that I am honored and proud to be the moderator of this panel and to be the token white male. I think this is truly a testament to how far we've come ahead as a society. It is really so inspiring for me to be part of this panel. So thank you for involving me. I'm an interventional cardiologist by training. And have practiced both in academia and in a tertiary care community-based health system in the San Francisco Bay Area for the last 20 years. In addition to that, I've been a serial medtech entrepreneur. I have founded 2 medical device companies, both in the interventional cardiology space, both with successful exits, one through an IPO in the days where you could do IPOs for medical device companies, and the latter one was through a successful M&A a number of years ago. I was acquired by a public company. Over the last 3 or 4 years, I have focused most of my time and energy on early stage investing, primarily late seed or perhaps early Series A, medical device and digital health companies, and again, primarily through my involvement with 2 professional angel groups in the San Francisco Bay Area, Life Science Angels and the Band of Angels. And I'll make a little plug that I'm currently raising a dedicated venture capital fund focused on maturing early stage companies, targeting more Series B type companies, again in the medical device and digital health space, as a natural extension of what I've been doing, and because there really is a global need for experienced venture investing in that space. There is a proliferation of seed investors that are available around the world, whether they're government or otherwise, for the earliest stages. And there has been crowding in the later stages with bulked up large VC firms and private equity and crossover funds that are investing in the latest stages. But there really is a need throughout the world for this type of a fund, BayMed Venture Partners. So that's the end of the plug. We're going to now shift over to asking our panelists questions. And there's no particular reason why I'm asking any of the panelists the questions. All of them, I am confident, could answer these questions with equal expertise. So it's just given the diversity and the extraordinary background of our panelists, I think that this will be very informative to the attendees at RESI. So June, let's start with you. Could you perhaps enlighten us on how the world has changed for all of us as early stage investors? How has the funding landscape changed, especially related to COVID-19?
Happy to address that. Thanks, Gary, for that question. To get started, maybe I can shine a little light on what Julian's has been focusing on investing. So we primarily invest in individual health and happiness. Our investment focus areas is very broad, all the way from biotech, therapeutics to device to digital health. And we also have partners looking at emotional consumer products, AR, VR, so anything that contribute to human happiness. And we're a global team. So global team, 23 people, cover 15 different locations across the US, Europe, and Asia. So our intention is really to have individuals on the ground, cover different ecosystem, and also powered by artificial intelligence tool built in-house to recruit all the early stage startups that is relevant for us. So we really see tons of deals every year. For example, last year we evaluated over 10,000 deals across the whole team. So what we have been seeing for the past few months is at the beginning of the pandemic hit, we sort of like pause and rethink what's going to be happening, like everyone else is doing. But really what we have been seeing is, just give you an example, we have seen 23 up rounds for the past 3 weeks, just over our portfolios. About like 10% of the portfolios going up and raising like an up round, which is very encouraging. From the whole landscape, we actually see that healthcare innovation is not slowing down, especially digital health solutions. It's like people say that it's like genie out of the box for this whole industry. More funds is being raised, more funding is getting into, and more deals is created. For us, we paused a little bit, but then like our investment pace just like very fast pick up again. So I would say like this whole industry is being accelerated, not like being so impacted because of COVID. I hope that helps.
I think that's very helpful. And I think that has been our experience as well. The predicted change in valuations or decrease in valuations that had been thought about related to COVID, given the experience with prior financial crises, like the Great Financial Crisis, a decade or so ago, really hasn't materialized. And what we tend to be seeing, in line with what you're saying, is that there's a lot of innovation, particularly on the digital health side. Some of it pivoted towards COVID-19, and that valuations have held fairly stable. This is borne out also by data from PitchBook and other data aggregators. So this is a once in a lifetime type of crisis, but what we've learned from prior crises, I think, hasn't necessarily translated to COVID-19. Prathna, perhaps you could answer the next question. So what are, for you, based in Toronto, what are your most important sources of deal flow for early stage companies?
Sure, happy to answer that, Gary, but I also have a thought on the previous one, if you don't mind. Just a really quick point around valuations, and we too, exactly, June, as you were saying, early days had this expectation, and north of the border, obviously we in Canada are a little bit more risk averse from a valuation perspective. But what we also found that was interesting is with companies now pitching predominantly over Zoom, folks are realizing that we are putting in the same effort presenting to Canadian investors as we would be to Silicon Valley based investors. And therefore, if the California investors are paying the price that a company is looking for, then that's what they're going to go with.
Okay. Efficiencies of the marketplace, right?
Exactly. Anyway, so back to your question, Gary. So our source of deal flow have pretty much stayed consistent, I'd say post-COVID as well, with obviously the big factor around events and conferences that are missing. And that would always be sort of a huge element of our resource investment in sourcing deal flow. So right now there's a heavy reliance really on our network and our referrals. So when I say network, it's the network of angel investors. A number of folks are engaged with early stage mentorship and in various startup communities across the country. And then like like I'm sure my colleagues on this call, we're actively talking to the incubators, the accelerators, the universities, the corporate innovation hubs, the creative destruction labs, Techstars, Y Combinators, etc. So interesting for us to see that over the summer, actually, I did see a little bit of a slowdown in terms of the volume of deal flow. It's certainly picking back up as we get closer towards the fall.
Are you investing with a mandate primarily for Canadian companies, or do you also invest in cross-border deals?
So we will only invest in Canadian companies, and the primary reason for that is because it's an angel investor group and individual angels are investing, we're also considering sort of personal tax implications. And investing in CCPCs, Canadian privately controlled corporations, actually end up being more beneficial from a longer term capital gains perspective. We have on occasion seen companies which are incorporated in several countries, but we will ask for Canadian as your primary.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned tax issues, and I just want to digress for a moment. We as angel investors in the US, as well as VCs, are often very mindful of the specific tax consequences in the US. So for many of the companies we invest in, some of the tax code is very relevant. For example, QSBS, or qualified small business stock. Exactly. And so the benefits for long-term capital gains are very important for us as investors. And as we have occasionally worked with cross-border deals, I have encouraged companies that view the US anyways as their major market to consider transitioning to a Delaware C corporation structure. And this can be done, depending on the country, relatively easily and inexpensively, with the Delaware C Corp being the parent corporation and the country of origin being a wholly owned subsidiary. So some of those things need to be worked out country by country, but it is something that early stage entrepreneurs should be mindful of, particularly if they're looking to the US as their major market or source of venture investing.
The interesting thing with that, Gary, I might just add really quickly, is predominantly with Canadian incorporated companies, there is a lot of government support that companies in their early stage can take advantage of around their research and development stages, such as the SHRED credits and NRC IRAP grants. So a lot of companies in early days actually find it quite effective and valuable to incorporate in Canada. And you're absolutely right, when it comes to commercialization and time for scaling, you have to start thinking early days.
Yes, no, and agree with that. And in working those things out and how to repay those grants sometimes are important. Again, good digression here. Israel's another very hot ecosystem in terms of medtech and digital health. And much of what has happened there in the last few decades was initially fueled by the Israel Innovation Authority, also known as the Chief Scientist Office. But when companies there look to move their IP out of the country, often if they have received funding from the IIA, that needs to be repaid. So those are things that, again, founders, entrepreneurs of early stage companies need to educate themselves on all of these different aspects. Nancy, this next question is for you. In what areas of life sciences do you tend to focus your investment strategy, and why?
Happy to answer that question, Gary. From insertion, we are an impact family office. So when we were looking at the life sciences, we wanted to find areas where we could generate the most impact. And therapeutics seem to be a space where we are looking at disease-altering therapies that have the potential to improve the way that the patient goes about the patient's quality of life. For example, AIDS. In the early 80s, it was considered a death sentence, but today, with the different therapies that have come to market and the different vaccinations, people are able to have hold a better quality of life than they would have in the past. So the idea is that therapeutics whether it is in oncology or neurodegenerative diseases or in immunology, has the ability to actually have this disease-altering effect. That is what we are looking to bring into the market for the patients. We want to improve their quality of life, and going about this process, focusing on therapeutics is being our course of action for the last 10 years. I have to say, as an investor, we also have to look at return on investments and how long it takes to generate returns on some of these assets, which usually take longer to get through commercialization. So what we've done in the past is, in the last 4 years, we've have added medtech devices as another short horizon area where our capital can actually begin to see some returns on investments within 1 year to 2 years of the investment, and realize some exits within our own portfolio. And knowing that some of these medtech devices actually have the ability to improve access of healthcare for locations where individuals do not have a hospital nearby, or where whereas as in times right now, for example, COVID, individuals don't have the ability to get to the hospital. Individuals that are immunely compromised have the ability to still be able to have access to healthcare and see their doctors, and still have the ability to be taken care of, even though without risking their health. So our focus is mainly in areas which will allow us to generate impact. So on the therapeutic, and also in regards to being able to have therapies that are disease altering, we are also focused on efficacy and efficiency. So, for example, just to cite one particular area, CAR T cell therapy is extremely toxic, it's very difficult to manufacture. And we are now working with a few companies looking for alternatives, whereas one CAR T cell treatment could be in north of $250,000 per treatment. We are now working with the CAR T cell therapies of the future, where we are actually looking at very simple manufacturing procedures, better efficacy with less side effects and less adverse reactions with potential cytokine storms, and have the ability to provide these treatments for patients for $20,000 a treatment, and be able to manufacture the product in a much simpler and less inexpensive format.
Nancy, thank you. That was a wonderful answer. And I guess what it really highlights for me is the uniqueness of your investment thesis, for two important reasons. I'm sure there are others. First of all, I think many angels have avoided investing regularly in therapeutics because of, as you've already alluded to, the duration of time until an exit, and the sheer amount of invested capital that's usually required to take these products all the way through to commercialization. So this is obviously a very important role that you play, and perhaps also speaks to the type of angel investing you're doing out of a family office. The other thing I would say is that many angel investors believe that if they're investing in life science, that they are impact investors, but the truth of it is that most of it is driven, of course, by profit. So the fact that you are investing in life science and the importance of that, and yet even more focusing in on doing it as an impact investor, I think is extremely laudable. So thank you very much for what you do.
Thank you. And if I may say one last thing, is that what is driving our investment thesis is mainly a reverse process. We went from investing on less risky assets, assets in phase 2 and phase 3, and then realized that there is a tremendous need for helping these companies at the IND stage, and helping them get to to that phase 1, phase 2, because they make so many mistakes, and they could have really benefited from having a big brother that understands the process earlier on in the process, that it is really crucial to be able to provide the support at the front end, because these groups are the ones generating the therapies of tomorrow, giving groups like Beacon Capital to have the ability to invest in these therapies. But unless you're driving the process and creating these feeder funds and identifying the assets of tomorrow, there won't be anything of quality to invest in. And there's a lot of effort for investors such as ourselves, that we rolled our sleeves up and work with our companies to fix cell lines, or to fix contracts, and to fix different items, or to fix cap tables with toxic investments in it. So it's so much better to be able to get at the front end and actually generate that impact in the front, as opposed to waiting until the asset has been de-risked, because then it comes with other legacy issues beyond the data that's been collected. There's cap table issues and licensing issues and scale-up issues.
Thank you, Nancy. Listen to you, I actually, the thought that went through my head is that they'd much be better off getting a big sister rather than a big brother. Anya, this question is for you. What are your key criteria for identifying companies worthy of further due diligence and potential investment?
Sure, I guess I come in from a very early stage perspective, so we're talking, some of them are just, being spun out of university research labs. So really, I guess, and I think this is the thesis that carries a bit further on, but, we're so focused on the team. The founding team really has to be top notch. There's a lot of focus on really understanding who are the builders of the technology, what sort of dynamic they have, and whether they're coachable. We call them VC backable teams. So because they can take feedback, they can evolve, and they can really pivot within this area. So I mean, we're effectively looking for the best teams that can execute. I guess the second part is around like technology and the problem that they're solving. We just, out of like the default of the job is that we see a lot of great ideas, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're solving a problem that's large enough that requires VC or venture capital investment. So this is sort of the tricky bit sometimes. So sometimes you see very incremental technologies, and whilst they're good, in terms of it being a VC sort of exit, it's very hard to create those returns. So really, we're looking for exciting technology that can really, that has ambitious plans. I think the third thing is, really looking at, the competitive landscape and knowing what your USP is. I think that's really important from a startup perspective. It's surprising how many people don't know what's happening in the landscape, and us being fed so many deals and vetting so many deals over a long period of time. We have a fair understanding of what the competitive landscape looks like for certain companies. So yeah, it's always nice to see that teams are aware of what's going on and to understand, how they really differentiate themselves. I mean, those are the sort of like very sort of key things that we look at early stage. But in terms of technology, of course, because we're a bit more niche, we're focused on upstream or downstream applications of genomics effectively. So anything and anyone that could use genomics, and we've seen that in a wide range of applications. So starting from agriculture to healthcare, therapeutics to, synthetic biology. I mean, we also invested in a company that that uses our sequencing technology to basically build algae surfboards. So there you go. You know, there are really, like, you can be very creative even with very niche sort of investment thesis.
Great, great. Well, actually, following on your question, I'm going to take the prerogative of the moderator and ask myself my favorite question, and I'll probably pass it on as well. So the question would be, how do you weigh the importance of the management team versus the technology? I love this question. And I'll go back to an old adage. I think for most experienced early stage investors, I'd rather invest in an A team with a B product than a B team with an A product. Now, that's an oversimplification because most A teams wouldn't be promoting a B product. But I think that it has been borne out in quite a few studies, including those conducted through the Kauffman Foundation and surveys with the Angel Capital Association, that all things being equal, perhaps the single most powerful predictor of a successful exit for a startup is a team that's done it before and done it before successfully. That's not to say that we as investors won't invest in a new team or a team that hasn't had experience in doing a startup. It's just that the bar is a little bit higher and other things have to be more developed or more obvious. So perhaps the market has to be enormous, perhaps the technology has to be extraordinary, and the founding team needs to show that they are willing to take mentoring well and work well with their investors. So there are certainly many other factors, but this is how I look at it. But June, I'm going to turn it over to you as well, because I think it is an important question that I'd like to get more more input from our esteemed panel. So how do you weigh the importance of the management team versus the technology?
I'm pretty much with you. I think, like, based on my investing experience and conversations with much senior investors, definitely like an experienced funding team is so important, especially in the healthcare and medical device spaces, with existing relationships and understanding better of the regulatory process, clinical process. The success rate is much enhanced overall. Maybe one exception I would say is in the probably therapeutics areas, as technologies, IP is equally as important as the funding team. We look at all different things across the product market fit, the senior leadership, temperament between the leadership and the rest of the team, the technology, the IP, and the terms. So we weigh them equally important as we evaluate deals, but I'm totally with you, Gary. I think experienced team definitely adds a lot of values to the company.
Great, thank you. Prath, I'm going to pass this next question on to you. So as you're evaluating companies to invest in, what level of supporting data or what amount of proof of concept do you require prior to considering investing?
That's a good question, Gary. And I would say certainly the degree of information we're looking for or the type will vary, of course, depending on the sector and the nature of the business. But for the purpose of your question, I'm assuming you're talking specifically in the life sciences space. And so our investment thesis within life sciences would really be in the medtech sector. And for the reasons mentioned in this call, I think our angels aren't there yet in terms of pharmaceutical investment. And so what that means is when we're looking at companies, for example, recently we did a surgical robotics one. We've done several digital health companies, maybe wearables, a DNA testing kit, which is being repurposed for COVID. So in all of these opportunities, you know, as June has also mentioned, the number one thing is even if the tech's in place, if the team's not in place, we won't go for it. The second thing, what we'd like to see in a data room that I'm sure all my colleagues here are looking through, we'd want to see for deep science some published studies, you know, renowned advisory board, folks that are experts in the space that can vouch for the technology that's being built. We also, angels at an early stage, people don't expect this actually, but we're looking for initial signs of commercial success. So be it through early days pilots or letters of intent, you know, those are critical in early days in this sector. And in terms of software companies, I'm thinking about the digital health ones that we would have done recently. The key indicator of maturity there is a ready product finished out in the market and users. If it's sort of a hardware, you're looking for an MVP that's been created, a prototype that's been through several levels of testing. And the key thing we look to see is, do you have strategic players involved in your story at the early days? And are you doing everything you can to get them involved? And the reason we do that is we full well acknowledge and appreciate that, you know, there's a huge role to play for angels in the early stage, but they can only get you so far. And it's so critical for companies to engage later stage entities in early days. And so that might be either in the form of partnerships with a client, having investors involved that can fund future rounds perhaps on your board or as an advisor. So we look to check for those things around viability of your future scaling plans.
Great, thank you. That was a terrific answer. Anya, I'm going to pose this question to you. Once you've decided you have an interest in a company, perhaps you could describe your due diligence process and the usual timeline from initially meeting company founders to actually executing the deal.
Sure. I mean, our general timelines are about 3 months, and we do this because our due diligence process, we have fixed, so we actually invite companies to apply twice a year effectively. So that's why our DD process is a fixed amount of time effectively. In terms of our due diligence, it goes very deep. So, you know, so we do a lot of due diligence on their technology. So we speak to industry KOLs, we speak to people internally, even at Illumina, to understand, you know, what other applications there could be of such a technology, or, you know, whether, you know, long term this is a viable option even. So there's a lot of due diligence on the technology itself, but also on the team. So we do a lot of checks on the team in terms of reference letters, recommendations, sort of financial, criminal checks as well. You know, you'll never know what you can find, but those kind of things are very necessary, because we've seen, like, in terms of being a life science investor, we've seen companies with in our portfolio over 90% active rate in the last 6 years. So that for us is a good sign, and that comes from the, you know, groundwork of doing that due diligence. So a lot of due diligence in terms of technology, team, cap tables. Oh my gosh, where do I start? You know, early stage investors, you know, I always thought cap tables would be the easiest one, but it's the bit that gets very messy right from the first investment. So we've done a lot of work with lawyers trying to
too many friends and family, right?
Yeah, and some very, very odd deals and odd terms. So, you know, so cap tables sometimes can be like Pandora's box, you know, deal breaker, because they've gotten into sort of agreements or given away so much equity that we can't see how the founders can effectively drive the business forward for the next, you know, 3 to 5 years. So these are sort of like some of the technical issues that, you know, we see, of course, and hopefully not covered in too much debt either very early on. So yeah, those are the kind of metrics that we look at for our due diligence.
Great. So Nancy, you've described a little bit how you try to help companies. I'd like you to go into a little more detail, if you don't mind. Once you've decided to make the investment and to be the big sister to the company, what typical involvement do you have with your portfolio companies following the initial investment? Does it involve board representation? What does the mentoring look like? How often do you interact with the senior management team? Just give us a sense for what you think best practices are as an early stage investor.
Well, this is a difficult thing to do to begin with, because most of these companies have a global footprint. And this is one of the main reasons why we decided to build the accelerator, to be able to have these companies under one roof. The idea would be for our team to show up into that location every day and to be able to have an open door policy for these companies, to interact with them and give them the ability to have discussions with us about whether it is CMC for their assets, or whether it is meetings with pre-IND meetings with the FDA, or licensing advice, whether on a global scale, or whether they should limit their efforts locally, and what within the US, and what type of licensing they should be doing. So basically, from financing, if they are looking to bring outside investors, we'll look at the terms of those term sheets and see what they're giving away. And when they are looking to begin to look for manufacturers to begin to generate their pilot batches, we focus on making sure that they're well capitalized, so they're not giving away half of the rights to their cell lines or to their IP in order to be able to manufacture their assets. So we basically have a suite of services that we offer them, but most importantly, we help them remain well capitalized, and we insert ourselves in a way that we like to have first right of refusal for investing, and the ability to lead those rounds. Because when we're looking at these companies, we're first of all, we're hoping that we'll be able to continue to invest in the progress of the company. So we like to make sure that we're keeping the cap table clean, that the types of deals that are being cemented and signed are not going to lead to toxic situations in the future when these companies are looking into a public situation, and to minimize dilution. And another thing that we do a lot, which is good for us and is good for the companies, is we focus a lot on looking into non-dilutive capital, such as NIH funds, and this is where some of these publications and being able to put together a proper package to get some of that non-dilutive funding to help the companies along on the earlier stage, so they're not giving up so much equity, and they can just focus on moving the assets forward.
Great, Nancy. Well, we only have a few minutes left, and I see that there is already a question in the Q&A box. I would encourage any of the non-panelist attendees that if you have any questions, go to the Q&A box and post them there, and we'll try to present them to the panelists. So the question that is listed there, it looks like it's probably for me. And it's, how many female founders and how many tech or device companies were in that survey or investigation to come to that conclusion that experienced teams and serial founders have a better chance of a successful exit? I would like to challenge the thesis a bit, since coachability of first-time founders and scientists is also a predictor of whether teams will be successful in follow-on investments and exits. The quality of the science approach, in my experience, coming from big pharma, still one of the main risks, but also indicator of high-value exits. This is from Sybil H. Sybil, I think that's an excellent question. Thank you for putting me or us on the spot. Data is obviously data. It doesn't answer every question. One needs to understand where it came from, confounding variables, all the things that you as a scientist probably understand. But it is from rather large data sets that were acquired from different organizations, and it does seem to be repetitive. It is true that it would probably be historically heavily weighted towards male founders. And it is by definition because angels tend to invest more in tech and devices rather than in therapeutics, heavily weighted towards tech and devices. And it's interesting because you bring up something that I was going to allude to, but I did not. And that is that I do believe that therapeutics and biotech is different. And there, when we talk about experience, the experience is the depth of the scientific background. And it may not be a prior exit. It may not be previously running a biotech or medtech startup, but it is clear that the depth and breadth of the scientific knowledge and experience is an important driver. And I think we do need that kind of data. I think that's further supported by data on compensation, which is sort of a secondary phenomenon. And I'm aware of data from one of the premier compensation consulting firms for the private industry and for investment industry. And that's that when it comes to biotech, there is more parity in income between male and female CEOs, as opposed to other areas of tech and medtech where that's not the case. And I think that speaks to the fact that there is more parity in terms of the scientific expertise and background in biotech than there may be in other areas. So hopefully that, in a way, answers your question. We do need more data, it's true. Do any of our other panelists want to take a stab at that question?
I would love to sort of just add to that point. I do think coachability is super important in founding teams. I think one of the things that gives entrepreneurs an edge if they founded a business before is they have the battle scars to prove that they've been through the process. And it is a huge learning process and sometimes underestimated. So that sort of gives them an unfair advantage, if that's the best way to say it, going into this. And I would say this, even looking at being an investor who's invested a lot in therapeutics and the medtech and digital health space, everyone's got to start somewhere, right? So even for those people who were serial entrepreneurs, they originally had to convince someone to invest in them. So they did have to start somewhere. And in biotech, of course, there are a lot of data points. The data package is very important, toxicity and studies that you have, the ADME profiles that you have very early on. Those are very important at the end of the day. But I think, to go back to your point, everyone has to start somewhere. Everyone does have to, being a good scientist does not necessarily mean you're a good entrepreneur and otherwise. So they're not, they're neither mutually exclusive, but it doesn't mean that they're mutually inclusive either.
Thank you, Anya, very much. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our session. I want to thank our extraordinary panel for their insightful comments. It's truly been an honor to have been on this panel with you. I want to thank the meeting organizer, Life Science Nation, and Joey Wong. And I think at this point, we will adjourn the panel. Thank you very much.